what do we mean by civility? We certainly know we need it more than ever, right? Anybody been watching the debates recently? Anybody looking at what's going on in our country and the crassness and the crudeness and the lack of sensitivity and the closing the borders and building the walls and I'm not naming names, you know, but it is a moment that kind of cries out for, you know, we need to address this. So what do we mean by civility? Well, we talked about the golden rule early on, which is what my uncle and father were raised with. How many of you were raised with a version of the golden rule as a principle to live by? Right? So when we do these trainings with lawyers, you know, we ask them, think about somebody who is a role model of civility. What kinds of words come out? What kinds of, when you conjure somebody who's civil, what's a word that would describe them?
Fair.
Fair.
Respectful.
Respectful. Kind. Generous. Reflective. Gracious. Huh? Accountable. Right? Huh? Mensch. A good mensch. You know, we have to leave it with mensch, right? A mensch is a civil person. That's right. And what it means is it doesn't mean, there's a variety of definitions out there, and I had a whole bunch of them written out, and then I thought I'm not going to give a lecture today. But the main thing is that at core, all of the definitions include some piece of the golden rule, some element of respect, and it's about a way of approaching and seeing others, and an openness to be with others. And so we're not saying you have to be agreeable and roll over and be docile and let people steamroll you. We're not saying civility means one can't disagree with another person. It's really the way in which you go about having the conversation and the way in which you approach it. We have a thing that we do with our program with the lawyers. I call it the Tai Chi of civility, because it's about an attitude as much as and behavior and skill set. It's all of that. It's not just one set of rules. So for me, civility calls upon us to do more than tolerate each other and our differences. It requires us to even do more than aretha. Respect, yeah. It's important to be respectful. But it also calls upon us, I believe, to be curious. Because when we're really curious about other and our differences, then we will value what all of that brings. And in so doing, we can have this is where our missions coalesce, just and humane world, right? We will treat each other differently. We need to connect in our shared humanity through many acts of civility, little and big. And I was reading a blog post just the other day that was written on the Mighty website. Anybody ever look at the Mighty website? It's interesting. I won't go into that. But this woman, Deborah Green, was writing about what occurred to her and thanking strangers that came to her aid 10 months ago. And she describes this moment where she had just started shopping in the Whole Foods and her shopping cart was partially full, and she was standing near the entrance, and she got a phone call from her brother. And the brother says, I hate to tell you, but our father just died. He killed himself. And she falls to her knees, lets out an agonizing scream. And these strangers came to her aid. The strangers are picking up her phone, trying to find the contact for her husband. One says, can I pray for you and your father? And she says, sure. And then this woman starts praying to Jesus, and she's like, hey, we're Jewish, But it was wonderful. It was a wonderful moment.
Jesus was Jewish too.
Jesus was Jewish. Thank you for that. And another one is trying to figure out how to get this woman back home in one piece. So they're planning, I can drive her back in her car, you follow me in your car, and then we can come back. And then Deborah, who's in a puddle on the floor, says, I have a friend who works here, maybe she's here. And sure enough, they find the friend, and the friend comes to her aid and takes her back into the employee section, and calls the husband to come get her. And the closing thing is the strangers bought her a gift card for Whole Foods to pay for her groceries so that she would know that they were still holding her. And that's the end of the story. And she ends, and I don't do this very often, but she ends, and I do want to quote her, because she ends this blog post by saying, "Your kindness, your compassion, your willingness to help a stranger in need have stayed with me until this day. And no matter how many times my mind takes me back to that horrible life-altering moment, it's not all darkness, because you reached out to help. You offered a ray of light in the bleakest moment I've ever endured. You may not even remember it. You may not remember me, but I will never, ever forget you. And though you may never know it, I give thanks for your presence in humanity each and every day." The power of civility is, through these small acts of kindness, we can transform lives. And you'll never know the light you can bring to somebody else's darkness. And that's just so eloquent. I just thought that those are my words, but I mean, in terms of transitioning, I think that's really what we're talking about with civility. So when we're talking about civility, we're asking people to be conscious and aware of their own stuff and aware of people around them. We're asking them to be creative and open-minded and thinking about there's many different ways to perceive this. My way isn't the only way. I have a colleague and dear friend who was explaining she was in a meeting that was getting very contentious, and she finally said, "You know, I just would like to share my truth." And I thought, what a great way to give room for other truths, but to also be heard. You know, and I think that's how we get to be heard, and we get to be listened to, and our ideas can flourish, and we can actually get to a better result when we bring everybody's voices to the table. And lastly, civility calls upon us to really be community-oriented. And I'm thinking of the Dalai Lama, who says that the greatest secret to happiness is being in service to others, right? And think about that good feeling you have when you know you've helped somebody else. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu talks about Ubuntu, which is this concept that human beings are inextricably connected to the other. And we are connected in such a deep way that our humanity depends upon us honoring the other. And he says, I need you to be the best you can be, because that's the only way I can be the best I can be. And so together, collectively, we're all rising with the tide. So I'll end with this other story. I don't know how many of you watched or saw in the news this summer in July. There was a protest going on in South Carolina. And it was right after they moved the Confederate flag from state grounds in South Carolina. And on one side of the courthouse grounds, there was a Black Lives Matter protest going on, demonstration. And on the other side was the neo-Nazis protesting against taking the flag down. And in the middle of this scene was Leroy Smith, who was a black state trooper in his uniform, and he was at the State House grounds, and he saw an elderly white man with a swastika t-shirt on who was starting to collapse out of heat exhaustion. And he took that man, took him by the arm, and he walked him up 5 flights of stairs to get him to a place where it was cool and he could sit inside the house. And there was a photograph of Leroy and this man, with Leroy helping this man. And this photograph was taken on an iPhone and social media. It went completely viral. This powerful, powerful image of not just helping a stranger that's a neutral, right? But actually having to come to somebody who there may be a lot more beneath that we've got to work through. And Leroy didn't stop to question it. Leroy just stepped up and helped this man because he saw a human. He saw a human in front of him. He didn't see the swastika or give it meaning. And so when interviewed about why he thought this photograph went viral and had struck such a chord in our culture, Leroy Smith said, love. I think that's the greatest thing in the world. It was love. So I would say it was love, but it was love that was embodied in the act of true civility. Thank you.